Good afternoon and welcome to this month's episode of What Has the Environment Ever Done for Us, which is the Cratus and Stantec joint project we've been running for about a year, looking at all things climate. So we're all back from Glasgow, although Nick is on a train heading north-ish again. And we thought we'd take the time to reflect on the second week of COP. But also think about what COP meant and means for our clients working in local communities and the councils that influence the place shaping of those people. As usual, we will go on to look at this week's nominees for Heroes and Hypocrites and the headlines of the last couple of weeks since we all returned home. And following the success of her report from COP26, Francesca is joining us again to give us a rundown of what went on there. So first, our guest this week is Cllr David Renard, leader of Swindon Council and chair of the EEHT board of the Local Government Association, which is responsible for economy, environment, housing and transport. So basically everything that matters. I can say that because I also sit on that board that David is the chair of. For those who don't know David, he has been a councillor since 2003 and has a range of cabinet posts before being elected leader in 2013, a position he maintains. And as well as being chair of the EEHT board, David is a founding member of the Unitary Councils Network and a board member of the think tank Localis. Has a professional background in travel and tourism, so I'm surprised you didn't apply for the tourism, leisure and sport brief as well, David, and in training, as well as being a college lecturer. So we need to make sure that we mind our P's and Q's or he'll be giving us a C+. So welcome, David, and welcome to the rest of the team, Johnny, Jenny and Keith, and of course, Nick on a train. So I'm going to hand over to Nick, who is going to chat to David. As usual, the rest of us might well just butt in with our intelligent questions. Oh, Johnny, anyway. Oh, look at that. Nick's so impressed. He's left us. So he's back. Nick is going to run the interview. If Nick loses his signal from the train, we'll put in our delay repay claim for him, and I'll take over. But do feel free to hop in, and we will have to say goodbye to David at 3:30 as he's far too important to stay with us any longer. So, Nick, if you're there, handing over to you.
Right, well, I'm going to get in. Can everyone hear me?
We can all hear you, Nick.
Great, thank you. Well, look, David, thank you for joining us, and it's a real privilege to have you on here because you're one of the quiet-voiced politicians who does so much behind the scenes. And last, you were in COP, 10 of you got places in the blue zone. And what I wanted to find out was how that worked out, what influence you had on decisions, not just in the UK, but how you were able to support other people coming from local communities across the world. So I wonder if you can share with us a bit of what you got up to in the blue zone, where some of us could not break in even when we were being nice to the policeman.
Okay, thanks, Nick. Thanks for that introduction, and also thanks to Vicky for that summary. So I was part, as you say, of the Local Government Association delegation of members with support from some officers. The key objective that we went there with was to ensure that the words local government or something similar was included in the final declaration to make it clear to governments across the world that local government is a really important part of delivering climate change and making sure that we can meet the targets. We think that's absolutely fundamental, and we work with our local government partners from across the globe to try and achieve that. And I'm pleased to say that by the time we got to the final declaration, the words local government as a key delivery partner did appear in the final declaration. So I think that really puts down a firm marker to make sure that we are included and we are involved and we are part of that delivery mechanism.
since Nick has disappeared, David, Vicky, do you mind if I do a quick follow-up on that?
Go on then.
Oh, sorry, Nick. Yeah, I was just interested to know whether, I mean, you were obviously keen to have a conversation about the importance of local government being part of the solution. Were there any conversations about how local government might be provided with the resources to do that?
Oh God, it takes my questions away.
Sorry,
Go,
Nick.
No, go, David. It's a really great question.
Okay. Yeah, it is a good question. I mean, I should say that as a delegation, we were there for 2 days. One was the day focusing on transport, and the other one was on the day on the built environment. That I guess is the key question, isn't it? There's a lot that the private sector can do. There's a lot that as individuals we can do. There's a lot that local authorities can do within existing resources. But having said that, there's we can't achieve it unless there's a very strong direction from government with the appropriate funding for those to support those initiatives that the markets and players aren't going to deliver. The government has launched, for example, its hydrogen strategy, but that and of course we've got the environment bill as well coming along, which is going to look at waste. And I think it's probably fair to say at the moment we're not really clear what resources government are going to put in behind this. And if I was to pick one other issue, I think that's pretty crucial at the moment is the funding around electric vehicle charging points in currently built up developed areas, terraced housing in particular. At the moment we're bidding into relatively small funding pots. My own authorities just put in 11 charging points with the money that we were given, which is great, but it's pretty small scale, and we need to have a lot more money to do a lot more on just that alone, as well as all the other initiatives.
But David, one of the things that interested me, and I think Vicky points out here, is that the local government is only responsible for 2% of the emissions, but actually can influence 30% in its role as being the local authority, the civic leader, the community leader, both for business, housing, and just in its own actions. Do you think that I'm interested because we've gone straight into money, but there's a lot can be done just by giving that leadership, first of all. Do you think that we're getting too quick to worry about money?
Well, I do agree with you, Nick. It's always easy, isn't it, to go straight to the money? But you're right. That's only part of the package, in my view. So again, I use my own council as an example. We've launched a campaign called Be the Change, which is aimed at local residents and what they can do. So it is about sorting their waste. It is about insulating their properties, giving them advice and information on how they can do their part. It's also about how we can work with local businesses, and local businesses want to do a lot of these things and are getting on and doing them, but there might be some things where they can deal with local authority leadership and assistance to help them achieve that. But we've got to recognise that the two areas with the largest amount of carbon dioxide emissions are housing and transport. So local authorities have got a really key role to play in housing and retrofitting those properties to make sure they are energy efficient. And that, of course, also has the double benefit of helping with the levelling up agenda, because it will mean that people living in those properties are going to have lower energy bills, which we know is going to be an increasing problem over the next few months and probably years. And transport, the other big emitter. Not too many authorities now own their own transport networks, although some do. But we can work in partnership with transport providers. Our own local bus company here, we're into phase 2 of the Zebra scheme to get all of their buses converted into electric, which will be a good thing in terms of contributing to reducing emissions. So there is a lot that local councils can do, as you say, not a huge amount with direct control, but certainly a lot where they can influence.
Well, Nick, we can't hear you. Your mouth is moving, but nothing's coming out.
Well, that's amazing considering on the train that anything's coming along. But David, one of the things that interests me about the role is you talk about putting 15 electric car charging points into your borough. But the move now is that BP, Shell, all the big energy and fuel providers are starting to look at control of this market. Do you think local government's role is also to start saying to big city institutions, come and join us. Here's an opportunity now to transform your businesses from the fossil fuels into the fuels of the future, and actually start working with you to build up a network of car charging points in Swindon, for instance. Because if we don't get that happening, we won't get people buying cars. I've got an instance in my own company where someone can't actually charge from outside their house, so therefore can't have an electric car.
Yeah,
absolutely. Before you come back on that, can I just challenge on that? Because there is a big question, isn't there, about should we be privatising the public space to facilitate electric car charging? Because we don't have fuel pumps outside people's houses. We expect people to go to a location, within their neighbourhood to charge, to fill their vehicle. So from a strategic point of view, would it not make more sense for councils to work on centralised places for charging, perhaps in council car parks or edge of town things, so that on the rapid ones, rather than potentially having the council funding something on every street, which actually just clutters the neighbourhood with private car charging paraphernalia?
Is this where we just point out you're a councillor?
This is where I point out I'm a councillor too, yes, without an electric car.
David, try to answer both of us if you may.
Yeah, well, I think I can, because I think it's a case of horses for courses, really, because yes, absolutely, we should be having charging points in council-owned car parks. But at the same time, we need to be encouraging the private sector to put them into supermarket car parks and other places that they own. We need to ensure that new developments have charging points both on street and on properties. And in fact, again, I'll give an example in Swindon where we're building a development called Whitchelstow in partnership with Cllr David Renard, and the charging points are going in onto the public highway and into people's houses. And of course, I welcome the announcement from the Prime Minister today about ensuring that all new developments are going to have these facilities. But the example I gave earlier on, and I think where there is a real role for councils, is existing town streets. And if you go to somewhere like, well, a couple of years ago, I was in Amsterdam. You can walk down any city centre street, and they've got charging points at various points along those streets. And if we do want people who want or need to own a car in city centres to make the change from fossil fuels to electric cars, then they've got to have the wherewithal to charge them, because we know that the vast majority of people charge their cars at home overnight, or they tend to need faster charging facilities when they're out and about or at their destinations. So it's a mixed economy, I think. We need to do all of the above in the appropriate places.
I think that's a very diplomatic answer, and I'm grateful for that. I think it's about how to bring that change fast into the marketplace, and I suppose we've got to use everything that's correct and right at the time. One of the things that interests us is, do the local authorities have the skills? Do you have access to the information? Do you have the quality of officers that are available to you? Because we have Jenny and Francesca and Johnny here, who are really big experts. I'm ignoring Keith completely because he's our resident boffin. But outside world, there's a lot of skills and knowledge been built up about the issues that we're now facing. Do you think the local authority has?
I think I got the gist of the question there, Vicky, though I could never go at that one. Yeah, I think skills actually, not only in this space, but in terms of a lot of things that we need to do for the future is the key question. How can we get enough people with the right skills in the right places to deliver this and many other things? And that is the big challenge. Smaller councils almost certainly probably won't have access to those sort of skills and knowledge, because quite often people in smaller councils are having to cover several different areas of expertise. Larger councils will probably find it easier to do that. But then there's opportunities for commissioning services from the private sector, and the local authority people are usually very good at commissioning and procuring services. So that's an option. But I think it's a key question that we need to keep at the front of our mind to make sure, well, not only that we do what we think is the right thing now, but actually trying to crystal ball gaze and look to the future to see what we might need in the future, because we're all assuming, or we all seem to be making the assumption that electric vehicles is the future, but hydrogen's clearly got a role. And actually we're putting in lots of charging points, but then we know the technology for charging off-road surfaces is there as well. So actually, are we putting in a lot of infrastructure now that in, let's say, 15 years time, to some extent is going to be obsolete? And I mean, I'm not pretending I know the answer to this, but I think these are the sorts of questions we all need to be asking ourselves.
It's a really big journey that local government's on, and if you look at the figures, you've got 30% of the population you can influence, 30% of our carbon emissions you can directly influence. Equally with planning, we had Steve Quartermain talking about how retrofitting the existing stock can be dramatic in reducing our carbon emissions. Do you think that government, through COP, has got the message and sees the need for bringing the climate change at the heart of government and for local government? Or are we still suffering from, that was an event, that was a policy, now we move on and not necessarily adapt our lives properly?
Yeah, I mean, this is, well, you raised quite a few questions there, Nick. Well, one, of course, is the ability of government to work across departments, which has been an issue for probably forever. But this is really an issue that both at local and national level, I think, needs to be on everybody's agenda, regardless of what part of government you work in. You have to give some thought to reducing our consumption, using sustainable options, and that has got to be driven through government, but it's got to come from the top. So yes, I mean, COP shouldn't just be seen as an event with a declaration at the end of it. All governments and all parts of government, and ideally all citizens, have got to engage with it and play their part. But it's got to be supported by a thought through strategy with the appropriate resources that sit with it. And that's a big job. It's a tough job, but it's one we've got to wrestle with.
And David, I'll hand over to everyone else, and I know Keith will have another question or two. One of the things that interests me is that green politics has been a marginal interest. The Green Party has been hovering around, but really at the last local elections, we started to see some changes. The Green message was actually taking votes. Do you think that with Greta and the younger people starting to see the issues of climate change coming at them and seeing it really matter to them, that we're going to start to see the green issues start to influence local elections as well as national?
I think they might do. I mean, it has been sort of a national issue for a while. Many people may remember David Cameron's Vote Blue, Go Green campaign. So it's a sort of an idea that's been around for a while. And of course, the Green Party's been with us for quite some time as well. But and I don't think it's just the younger people. I think the younger people perhaps have raised the issue, but I was talking to somebody who works in the climate change world, and was telling me, he's also a councillor actually, and he was telling me that the vast majority of his votes that allowed him to win, indeed as an independent candidate, were from older people who were really concerned about the future for their children and their grandchildren. So I think it's easy to portray it as a younger person's issue, but actually I think it is now becoming embedded and something of concern to a much wider base of the population. And it's certainly something I think all the political parties are engaging with now. And in my own cabinet, I went as far as appointing a cabinet member with specific responsibility for climate change 18 months ago. So, you know, part of his job is, going back to what we were just talking about, is to make sure that that agenda is embedded across all the work of the council. And you know, he lives and breathes it himself, so he's a great ambassador for it. And I'd encourage other council leaders to consider doing the same thing.
Well, not only do you encourage them, we will encourage them as much as we can, because I think that it has to be at the heart of every decision now made going forward. Keith, I
did you detect I was gagging for another question?
Yeah.
Excellent. Because the question you were just asking about how you put climate change at the centre of all policy making and the influence that that's having on voting. One of the things that came out from COP for me, not so much sort of government policy discussions, but in the fringe, was the importance of both reducing consumption as part of the answer and the need for pace to be doing this at speed, because there is a fixed carbon budget, and if we use it all up in the next 10 years before we take real action, then it's gone. And so those things seem to be really important to the debate amongst the people who are interested enough to go to COP. But I wonder how that plays out politically for a local authority and for people who are looking for election, having to talk about the really tough issues about, you know, changing the way that we consume things, and the amount we travel, the amount we fly, the amount we use energy. You know, how does that play out politically, David?
Yeah, that's for a politician, that's a really important question, Keith. And you know, I think my starting point is if we just all set ourselves up as politicians and say this is what you must do, you know, collectively, all of the people that we serve, then we're probably not going to get very far. We've actually got to give people reasons for doing this, and whether it's getting on a bus rather than getting in a train, in a car, or whether it's recycling their waste rather than not recycling it, we've got to give them reasons to come on the journey with us. And that's the challenge politically, I think, because I think if we just stand up and say, you must do, you know, you can't get in your car, you must get on a bus, there's going to be a pretty big backlash. But if we can provide frequent, clean bus services that are convenient for people, then they're more likely to make the switch. And of course, price is obviously a key factor in any transaction. It's got to be at least as cheap, if not cheaper, than their perhaps preferred or current alternative. So yeah, those are the sorts of things I think we've got to think through. But telling people or compelling them is not going to make us popular politically.
Yeah. Do you think there was a missed opportunity post-COVID to embed some of the, you know, for example, the work from home wins, or, you know, the sorts of things that we were doing that we hadn't expected would be successful in changing behaviours? Have we missed an opportunity to try and embed some of that in people's behaviours, do you think?
I'm not sure we have, because, well, certainly with working from home, a lot of businesses have um, taken on board the fact that their staff in many cases prefer to work from home and are reshaping their business model as a result of that. So that will have the effect of reducing our carbon footprint. So, that's a good thing. But of course, the downside to COVID is that people stop getting on public transport, and of course that is something we want them to do. Even now, I think there's a bit of a reluctance. My own local bus company was telling me they're back to about 80% of ridership compared with pre-pandemic. So some of that, of course, might be down to the fact that people are working at home. But we all know that if everybody switches from a petrol or diesel car into a electric vehicle overnight, that doesn't help us deal with the impact on the climate. We have got to get them to make that shift. So we should overall be seeing more people using public transport rather than private transport. But so I think we have made some gains, but it's just changed the picture, I think, rather than solved it or not.
Thanks, David. Apologies, Vicky.
No, it's fine. I just wanted to link it back to David's role with the Local Government Association, because I think one of the things which we've brought up on a monthly basis is this conflict between decisions that don't seem to match the rhetoric. I'll give the coal mine as one example, but in your role as chairing this board, which does cover transport as well as the environment, how do you see being able to influence the government to not have this undermining effect of some of the really impressive things local government are doing, and then national policy seems to sort of give people the carte blanche to do something different?
Yeah, I don't know if you've got a specific example you're thinking of there, Vicky.
I was thinking about the sort of coal mine versus I know Swindon's done some amazing stuff with solar.
Okay.
Renewables has been, and hydrogen as well. I know Swindon is a hub for that. Is there any more that could be done by government, or that the LGA needs to lever government to do, so that everybody's on the same path?
Okay. So the declaration out of COP, of course, talked about reducing the use of coal or phasing it out. But I think there's a general acceptance that we've got to eliminate fossil fuels altogether. We know about the coal mine that was given planning permission recently, and as the Prime Minister said, that was a matter for the local planning department to make a decision on, rather than him or anyone else in national government. But I think that's perhaps an example of where planning policies need to be aligned to national goals on climate change. The planning committee, for whatever reason in that area, obviously thought that there were no legitimate planning reasons for refusing that particular application. But of course, if it was in national planning law that we shouldn't be approving new coal and oil fire power stations, then that would be, or indeed exploration, that would be quite an easy one to for the local planning authority to deal with. So I suspect there always will be these sort of anomalies, but we've just got to work them through.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. And I know we'll be coming on to looking at the planning reforms when they finally come through next year. Obviously, they've been rather delayed. I know that David's got to go. Nick, do you want to wrap something up with a final question or thought to David before we let him go?
Yeah, one of the thoughts I had, David, was that during the pandemic, local government was just outstanding, and great credit and kudos to everyone that delivered amazing support to their communities at a time when great uncertainty and concern and health issues were prevailing. Do you think that the government should take that lead with the weekly phone calls, the access to the top scientific brains in the fight for climate change, and start to actually bring people together for sharing the most up-to-date wisdom, as they did in the whole time during the COVID concerns?
Well, certainly sharing of best practice is something that the local government association's been doing for many years on many different topics, and it's extremely helpful. We don't want people reinventing the wheel. So it would certainly be helpful for government to bring together all of the best minds on climate change, and create that strategy and get the funding behind it, and give the steer and framework that local government need in order to deliver off the back of it. So I'd certainly say that would be helpful.
David, thank you so much for joining us, giving up your time, doing so much, and I hope you'll come back and join us again, because you're right at the heart of this journey, and we'd love to enjoy the insight that you have to give us. So thank you very much for joining us, and I'm sorry about the train route.
No, not at all. Good to see you on the train, and delighted to be here. Thanks for inviting me, and I look forward to the next time.
Thanks, David. That's really brilliant. We'll carry on now with our with moving across to Francesca, who will be able to tell us a little bit more about week 2. So we had our last session on the second Monday of COP, and you gave us a fantastic update on the first week. But we know that, as David said, the Transport Day, the Built Environment Day, the Gender Day, there was some really big stuff on week 2. So give us a whistle-stop tour of the highs and lows.
Vicky, I think you went on mute.
Was I on mute through the whole of that ramble?
No, I do
hope not. The highs and lows of week 2, if you wouldn't mind, Francesca.
Of course, yes. Thank you, Vicky. So just a quick summary of what happened in week 2 at COP26. For those who don't know, the topics that were covered there were nature, adaptation, loss and damage, gender, science, innovation, transport, and the last day was focused on cities and built environments. So I'll just have a quick summary for each of the topics. So starting off with the first day of the second week, looking at nature. So COP26 was the first, let's say, event that actually featured biodiversity as a key part of proceedings, and participants highlighted the strong link between biodiversity and climate change, giving great attention to this area. And more than 90 countries, which is approximately 38% of global GDP, signed up for the Leaders' Pledge for Nature to reverse biodiversity loss by 2030, which was a great achievement. In addition to that, 45 governments pledged urgent action and investment to protect nature. Within that, Canada announced $1 billion focused on nature-based solutions in developing countries. And similarly, that followed with 95 companies committing to Nature Positive, which aims to an agreement to work towards halting and reversing the decline of nature by 2030. So I guess overall, that first day was quite a success in terms of pushing towards not only financing deforestation, but also protecting biodiversity more generally, and having greater commitments with regards to agricultural policies being more sustainable, less polluting, and protecting food supplies against climate change. The second day was focused on adaptation, loss, and damage. And here, this day started off with the foreign minister of Tuvalu, who stood knee-deep in the water to show the sea level rises, to make that point come around strongly. And he pleaded for richer nations to act with regards to sea level rises. And it has been estimated that climate change will push over 100 million people into poverty, and $300 billion will be recovered for adaptation by 2030. So there is a strong need for adaptation plans to be created in partnership with more vulnerable groups that have the greatest needs and need to adapt to address climate inequality in the various regions across the world. So I guess in that theme, it was all about supporting those more vulnerable nations. When it comes to gender, here there was a discussion around women and girls who are bearing the greatest, burdens when it comes to climate change. and this is well known and well reported. There is evidence showing that around 80% of people who are displaced by climate change are women, and at least 4 million girls will be prevented from completing their education due to climate-related events. And during COP, we also heard calls to achieve greater gender-responsive finance and involve more women on the ground. There was also push for funds to support needs of social and gender experts, so not just only technical, and also a lot of discussions around having more women holding seats at the table, making those important decisions, as well as supporting women groups and female entrepreneurs with businesses related to climate change action. And just to add to this, evidence shows that gender and equal societies are less likely to end up in conflict, and countries with more women in power have stronger climate policies. So the climate urgency is not only solved by the same people who created it, but actually having a female representation at COP, which was really important. We also had, obviously, we spoke about transport being a very a theme with a lot of attention this COP. As we know, transport is the sector responsible for around 30% of global greenhouse gas emissions. And within this space, around 30 countries and 6 major vehicle manufacturers pledged that all cars that were sold by 2040 would be zero emissions. And although there are hopes that this will start a mass market for electric vehicles, there are still questions that remain about the carbon footprint of the EV car production. There are studies that show that these are 70% higher than internal combustion engines. So a bit of a debate within that side of things, and also the support of renewable charging, energy, and resource recovery was also covered there. And then a bit of a controversy also emerged in the Transport Day. So Volkswagen and Toyota did not sign the pledge, and neither did the US, China, or Germany, although many of their cities and manufacturers did. And Volkswagen actually cited that battery capacity and renewable energy grid development were potential barriers to meeting these targets. And some NGOs actually are now suing them for not failing to do enough within this side of things. Another great thing that came around in the Transport Day was the Aviation Climate Ambition Coalition, which was launched, and this aims to reduce aviation emissions in line with the efforts to limit the warming of 1.5 degrees. This was backed by 23 countries, which represent around 40% of the aviation market. There was hope that there would have been more support, but still it's a step forward. Spain and France were restated their intentions to ban short-haul flights in alternative with train routes that were shorter than 2.5 hours. And the UK government, among others, is also exploring new technologies within this area. So that was transport. And just to end on the last day, this was cities and built environment. Lots of things happened also within this day. So just to give a bit of a context, the scale of construction at the moment. So globally, we build the equivalent of the size of Paris every week. And this is a very sad statistic, actually, because if we look at it at a global scale, it means that if everyone wants to live the way that we are currently living, we would require 3 planets. So to put that in perspective, there was a lot of action when it comes to cities and built environment. Firstly, the Urban Climate Action Program was launched, and this was to provide technical assistance to at least 15 mayors of megacities in developing countries, and helping them to shape and deliver goals to reach net zero emissions and build resilience to climate change. Global cities have taken up their role in climate action. So these were around 1,049 cities and local governments who got together, and now they're part of the UN Race to Zero, which more or less represents 722 million people, and with the intention to reduce global emissions by 2030. And during this day, we also had the surprise of seeing the US and China coming together with a joint declaration. This was quite a surprise for everyone, but a positive one, where we see the two nations, greater polluters in the world, coming together to committing in enhancing climate change actions and raising that ambition. So that was a nice way to kind of end the COP26, although there was a very strong disappointment from these nations not being super supportive of COP26. It was nice to see that they've come together nonetheless on a parallel to still make commitments with regards to climate change. And just to conclude, the COP26 was an opportunity for leaders to dramatically, change the course of how things are being happened. There was, as I said, a lot of controversy and still some frustration, especially from younger generations. But nonetheless, just to end on a positive note, COP26 was an opportunity to raise awareness about climate change, and this was clear by the amount of stakeholders involved. And there was a lot of media attention and a lot of people on the ground at Glasgow. And we could see this in the streets, lots of activists, people, young people, businesses, indigenous people, charities, all coming together to address climate change. So I think overall it has given hope and opportunity to bring all of these actions to life. So I'm curious to see how all of these pledges are going to actually be put in practice.
So I think what's really interesting about this is that COP26 was, massively built up in the world's consciousness. But it was the 26th of this, and we are less than a year away from COP27, which is in Egypt. And there's already been talk about, will it even be possible to protest in Egypt as they did in Scotland? I know COP26 was made, it was 5 years on from Paris, therefore it was that seminal moment. What's the seminal moment for COP27? Because it feels a little bit like it was a success, but it was a disappointment. So is there a sense that actually COP27 is about something, or is that just going to pass a bit unnoticed? I don't know if anyone's got any thought on that.
Well, first, can I just, before I answer that, for me, watching the final declaration and Alok Sharma get emotional, I was absolutely speechless about the fact that the UK government had signed up to, the UK government had signed up to an agreement without the support of the House of Commons, without a referendum, where the economic implications are far greater than the European Union's membership would ever create. I don't know. So I was pretty gobsmacked about the final declaration, because the Paris Declaration rules that they were all talking about is how that we're now judged. So it was an extraordinary moment, and it still isn't being covered by the press, as we have just entered into an economic commitment that far outweighs anything we've ever done before. So 27, I think, is going to be huge, because it's now got to deliver. It's done it. Everyone's signed up to this economic pact. Money will be moved around the world. And I think 27 has to now start saying, show me what you've done, and let's share the good practice. 27 is now.
I think the other thing it's got to do, Nick, is that current commitments don't yet hit the necessary pace and scale of change of carbon reduction that is necessary. And that's because there are several nations still hanging out as outliers and not putting forward ambitious enough plans. That, I think, pulling everybody into line is going to be the key thing that the UN is going to be trying to do before 2027.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, we shall watch and see. Johnny, have you got a view on that?
Yeah, and I'd be interested to hear Jenny's view on it as well, because it's something that we've been chewing over together. So in this declaration, or in the amendments, part of those amendments which you would have heard about is for everybody to update their nationally determined contributions, which is done every 5 years. Hence Paris, and now 5 years on Glasgow, and it was everybody presenting their NDCs over the last year. But in a game of cards, people are setting out what their cards are, their hand is, without seeing anybody else's hand. So there is a massive discontinuity between different countries' nationally determined contributions. Now, this year, it gives a massive opportunity to harmonise all of those and create those bilateral and multilateral agreements between countries to move things forward.
Yeah.
And really, that is the whole reason why the UK government were trying to get everybody to, by Sharm el-Sheikh in COP27, is to come back with new NDCs. So we've got those all levelled up. So hugely important next year in Egypt, because that will take the step forward of that levelling up. Jenny, what's your views on that? Because that's a lot of the music that we're hearing is in that space.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think the thing I was going to add, which was kind of alluded to there, but obviously a key part of the final agreement, was that countries have to come back together and revisit their commitments on an annual basis. And that's where things have moved on from Paris, because previously it was that sort of 5-year marker in the sand. And I think that's a great place to be in terms of people having to come back annually much more often. So hopefully that means we will see quicker progress now.
And that will be in keeping with technology and innovation as well. If somebody cracks the nut of nuclear fusion, then everybody's nationally determined contribution will have fusion in it. Or if we deliver hydrogen at a price that is cheaper than getting gas out of the ground, that is what everybody will be doing. And at the moment, there are only a handful of countries that have got hydrogen even in their nationally determined contributions.
Interesting. Well, we shall watch and see. So time is marching on towards COP27, but towards the end of this episode. So I'm wondering whether, Keith, you've got some fabulous sort of headlines since COP26. Do you want to take us through what are the highlights since Glasgow?
Well, I'm now not going to talk about Boris's decision to ask for a car charging point in every home, and therefore encourage everybody to drive a car. I think we've already covered that today, Johnny. I thought that would make you smile. But we did talk with David about the importance of harmonising decisions at a national level with decisions at a local level, and we talked about the coal mining decision and the rest of it. And I just thought it was very interesting last week that we had what seems to be an incredibly boring document, but it's not. It's the National Infrastructure Assessment Baseline Report, which was prepared by the National Infrastructure Commission. Now, this is the document that will underpin the next National Infrastructure Assessment in 2023. And since it last did this, it has had net zero, climate resilience and levelling up added into its brief. And so it's probably no surprise that that this new baseline report looks a bit different to the last time. Interestingly, the first thing it does is to look at performance over the last 3 years, and it gives a sort of quite well done mark for broadband 4G, and it gives quite good to electricity and grid decarbonisation. But it gives definitely could do better to transport emissions, which basically haven't changed, home heating and energy efficiency, and flood protection and water management. And so what it says it needs to do and put at the heart of the next set of national infrastructure assessment needs are infrastructure needed for hydrogen and carbon capture and storage to decarbonise a major part of the economy. Long-term investment needs for surface transport within and between cities and towns. I'm going to come back to that one because that's really important. And improving recycling rates. And it talks about the research that it's going to do about heat pumps and home heating, the role of hydrogen, and ways of reducing congestion and reducing the future demand on roads. Now that connected with the point above about long-term investment needs for surface transport is really important, because it's a recognition in national policy, or at least in the preparation for national policy, of the importance of reducing travel demand on roads as part of the overall solution. Or at least that's the way I read that. Now, that coming hard on the heels of the publication of that report was the publication of the integrated rail plan, which was described either as an ambitious deliverable plan backed by the largest single government investment ever made in our rail networks, aimed at delivering punctual, frequent and reliable journeys for everybody, brackets, Grant Shapps, or by Martin Gannon of the North East Joint Transport Committee as a hammer blow for the North East and the very opposite of levelling up, or TfN's woefully inadequate. Or I particularly liked Steve Rotherham's "The integrated rail plan had the potential to be as transformative for rail travel as Stephenson's rocket. Instead, we have got a plan that could have been promoted by Gladstone in the Victorian era." So what is the plan that has so annoyed our northern politicians? Well, HS2 has been sliced off between Leeds and East Midlands Parkway, so it's been shortened, and it now stops on the eastern leg before it reaches Leeds. But it proposes a new line to be built from Warrington to the western borders of Yorkshire, which will basically be a sort of northern powerhouse rail idea. And then the upgrade of 3 lines: the Midlands Main Line, the Transpennine route, and the East Coast Main Line, to be upgraded with line speed improvements and digital signalling. So quite a big package, 96 billion, of which 56 has already been announced as part of HS2, I'm gathering from my reading of the various reports on this. So a net additional £40 billion on transport. Now, what's interesting about this is, if you were reading the National Infrastructure Assessment talking about the importance of demand reduction and interurban travel, this now seems to be moving our sort of HS2 period rail strategy, long distance, high speed movement, into a new era of the importance of interconnectivity between and within cities, which is quite a different mood music and quite a different strategy. Some may say that that has been driven by cost and the effects of the pandemic. Some might say it's been driven by a recognition of the importance of the red wall seats in the Midlands and the north of England, not just in the north of England. But some may say it's more reflective of this sort of change in strategy and focus on trying to encourage more local trips, shifting modes from the private car over to public transport. So, whatever it is, it's not simple. It's not straightforward. It's not one thing or another thing. But it does seem to be a policy direction that looks to try and make the rail network become a more robust and reliable alternative to the private car for more journeys. And I think, if that's what it is, I think that's actually a really good thing from a transport decarbonisation perspective.
It's interesting as we move on to our sort of climate hypocrites or climate villains, if you like, is that sometimes one person's villain is another person's hero. So for everyone who was, having a go about slashing HS2, there was another group of people who were saying, hang on a minute, but this actually makes my local journeys more effective. So it does show just how difficult this whole agenda is, doesn't it, Keith? So Johnny, I'm going to
absolutely. By the way, if you're interested in this stuff, there is an article in Rail News. The article's interesting, but the comments at the back are even more interesting, particularly the commentary about the media, who've been having a go at cutting HS2 for years and years and years, being just the same media that are now having a go at cutting HS2 and all the implications of that. So yeah, if you're interested in seeing both sides of the story, it's a very interesting read.
Yeah. So talking about both sides of the story, Johnny, obviously we've talked a lot, haven't we, in the last year across our whole lives about sort of how do we support the economy and how do we bounce back after COVID. But give us a little bit, we've only got a few minutes left, but a little bit of a flavour of the so-called hypocrisies around this time of year.
It's tricky, and actually talking with David just said, I was just reflecting on we use old mechanisms, backward mechanisms, to try and work things out going forward. I think it was Einstein's definition of madness, isn't it, of using the same approaches and processes to try and get the same outcomes. We don't really achieve them. So in public-private partnerships, we need to find new ways of being able to do that, to completely change the way that we deliver and plan decarbonisation. And that is so similar to the concept of consumption. And Keith, you used the word consumption 3 or 4 times. And again, I get this muddle between, is this hypocrisy or is this irony? We come off the back of what many people claim was a successful COP up in Glasgow, to be bombarded with Black Friday advertisements. I was in our local town and I got handouts and leaflets, paper saying it's Black Friday, 15% off, a piece of paper that ended up straight in the recycling bin. The whole concept of consumption, I think, is a very, very interesting piece that we need to talk through. And I've mentioned this before. We've got a great colleague of mine, Ron Henry, who talks about temperance. And are we really going to achieve our global aspirations and our commitments, especially from the UK perspective, if we enter into a process like Black Friday, which is all about buying more stuff? And I love a bargain. I love a bargain, but at the level of what is bombarded, I think it's getting a little bit too much. And these organisations, the algorithms in particular that keep on trying to sell me stuff, need to change a little bit. So I've sold a little bit less stuff. Even though I don't buy that much anyway. I was pointed out actually this morning, I've had this shirt, it was bought to me for my 21st birthday. So sustainable fashion, really important.
You can still fit into it is the most impressive part, Johnny. Of course, you know, as my husband reminds me every time he gets out the shirt we wore the night we met. He goes, remember the shirt? Yes. Just because you can still fit into it 24 years later and I can't fit into the dress. So let's finish on a high, Jenny. Jenny's going to, because Jenny is so lovely, Jenny's going to give us a couple of minutes on the climate heroes since the last time we met.
I'm utterly distracted now because Johnny sent me an article he wrote from about 12, 13 years ago with some very interesting fashion he was wearing back then. It was all about climate change and energy efficiency requirements that are going to affect companies, which is a nice reminder of how long we've been talking about these things. Anyway, not sure if Johnny's still got that tie, but I'll just give a quick summary of some heroes. And as per usual, everyone's sort of teed me up very nicely talking about consumption. I was going to talk a little bit about circular economy because Vicky, you sent me a very interesting article all about the potential usage of bacteria and how it could be manipulated to produce ethanol and assist in essentially realizing a circular economy where we capture carbon dioxide from the air. It can help produce biofuels and stimulate the bioeconomy, which is absolutely going to be essential in moving away from using fossil fuels. However, I'm not going to give that my hero sort of award. What I was going to base my hero award on today is a couple of statements which I heard up at COP26, a few phrases which remind me of what we all need to do. We need an everything strategy. Everyone needs to be taking action at all levels. Everyone needs to be doing what they can possible. We can't just focus in on one thing. So for me, whilst science and innovation is absolutely crucial and one part of the story, there's a lot of things we can be cracking on with right now, bottom-up action. This is an emergency. If we're going to treat it like an emergency, we need to be making sure we're not just talking about 2030, and we need to be doing things in the next couple of years. I was also going to just give a shout out to a couple of conversations I've had with people in local authorities who've mentioned, for example, fantastic what's going on at COP26, but what I'm interested in is what we're doing right now in our local area, speaking to businesses and organisations, getting them to make stronger pledges and get on and reduce carbon emissions through projects. So I wasn't, without sort of going over the time limit, I could have given lots of different examples of exciting projects people are cracking on with, which are actually reducing carbon emissions. I won't do that, but this is just a sort of a brief shout out to anyone who's actually just cracking on and delivering projects that are having a positive impact on people and the environment. It could be re-establishing nature, rewilding areas. It could be an award-winning tower block development up in Glasgow, which has reduced energy consumption by 80% for residents. Anyway, list could go on, but it was just kind of my reminder of, we've been talking a lot about this international cooperation and COP26, obviously, but yeah, let's get on and do it.
I'm really glad you said that, Jenny, because I wrote an article last week, which you can read on the Cratus LinkedIn page, which talks very much about all of us as heroes, and actually how wherever we are in our journey, we just need to move the next step forward. If you're in the first step and all you're doing is recycling, that's cool. What else are you going to do? Those people who are a lot further along is making sure you're only ever going forward, isn't it? So I think that's a really good reminder that it's everybody's job to be a climate hero. And we will all make mistakes, especially with Black Friday and thinking, I didn't buy much last year, please can I make up for it this year? No, we really must stop buying. But it is hard when we've spent decades being thrown into that consumption environment, and when people are telling us that other people's jobs rely on us continuing to buy that stuff. So yeah, I think all of us can be heroes and hypocrites within the space of an hour. So that wraps up this episode of What's the Environment Ever Done for Us, which is brought to you by Cratus and Stantec. Our next episode is hopefully going to be focused on travel, something many of us haven't had the chance to do this year, that most of us are thinking about as the weather closes in about what next year is going to bring. So we do hope to see you all again next time on What Has the Environment Ever Done for Us. Bye-bye.